6 sisters. Girls, clean your brother, please. Mom, Ava said. He's gross, said Anna. His fur tastes funny, Ellie said. Like shrew guts, Aya said. Yeah, Ada and Agatha said together, and owl pellets. The sisters' giggles echoed off the walls of the stone den. Yuli, their only brother, listened from a dark corner, wobbling on his one good foreleg. His other leg, the front left one, curled against his chest like a dried-up dandelion stem, the paw a wilted flower. It didn't show any sign of growing like the other 3, as much as his mother licked at it. Girls, their mother scolded, clean your brother now, or I'll bite your lips. Ava huffed, and her huff was echoed 5 times. Yuli had tried cleaning himself. He really had. But it was impossible to sit upright and run his one good forepaw over his ears without thumping over and bruising his chest. He had tried lying on his side, licking his good forepaw and swiping at his face, but he always ended up tumbling himself in circles, making his fur even dirtier than before. Mom says we have to clean you, Ava said. Yeah, so you don't stink up the den, said Anna. And attract every hawk in the universe, Ellie said. And I heard, Yuli said before they could continue. He slid his forepaw forward, slumping to his stomach, and lay his muzzle on the stone. His sisters took little licks at his fur, making it stand out at all angles. 2 of them made gagging sounds. Another gave him painful nips instead of licks. Yuli knew it was Ava. I'm going hunting, kits, their mother called from the den's entrance. Howl if you see any shadows. Yuli's stomach ached in anticipation of dinner. He wasn't much of a fighter, and because he had to wrestle his 6 sisters for every morsel of food their mom dragged into the den, he barely ate enough to keep his good leg steady, let alone the shriveled one. The kid's father was meant to bring fresh kills to the den for their first 10 weeks, but Yuli's mom told them that their dad had died in a terrible accident before they were born. And no, she wouldn't say what happened until they were older. Whatever their mom could hunt and whatever they managed to wrestle from their siblings was what they got to eat. The moment their mom's shadow vanished up the stone slope, Yuli's sisters stopped cleaning, leaving his skin grimy and itchy. Ava smiled at him. We won't clean you much longer, you know. Not much longer now, Allie said. Want to know how we know? Aya said. No, Yuli said in a slump. Mr. Scratch told us, said Anna. Yuli's jaw clenched. There's no such thing as Mr. Scratch, he said, even though the name never failed to send a chill to the tip of his tail. Oh, Mr. Scratch is real, all right, Ava said. As real as moonlight, said Aya. Yuli struggled to sit up. That doesn't even make any sense. Few things about Mr. Scratch made sense. What was he? Where did he come from? And when would his sisters have heard about something Yuli hadn't? Had they slipped out of the den at night when he and his mom were asleep? Had they whispered to Mr. Scratch under the light of the moon? The thought gave Yuli a case of the moth flutters. As if smelling his fear, his 6 sisters started to walk circles around him. Mr. Scratch is made of ash. Mr. Scratch has teeth that gnash, gobbles all the litter's runts. Tiny kits are what he hunts. Dear mother won't make any fuss when there's more food for the rest of us. Yuli scowled. That poem isn't even... It isn't... He was trying to tell his sisters that the poem wasn't very good, that the birds in the alder trees sang much more interesting songs about battles and hidden caches and daring escapes from predators. But his body betrayed him. That poem's dumb! The sisters giggled in delight. You'd better not hiccup when Mr. Scratch comes around. Better not. Otherwise, he'll find you. He'll catch you in his ashy teeth, and that will be the end of Yuli. The only thing Yuli hated more than his nickname was when his sisters talked like this, as if the same dark voice slipped from muzzle to muzzle using 6 tongues to speak. But where that voice came from, Yuli had no idea. Later that night, their mother dragged dinner into the den and then promptly fell asleep. The sisters pounced, and the groundhog vanished in a blur of fur and blood. Yuli managed to wriggle between their thrashing bodies and snag a bit of something, which he clamped in his muzzle and took back to his corner. It was nothing but an ear, full of cartilage, but the sisters still stared with jealous eyes and bloody muzzles as he choked it down. "Wake up! Wake up, my little pups!" Yuli stirred from the hunting dream to find his 6 sisters bounding toward the den's entrance, which glowed orange and gray. He hefted himself onto his foreleg and hopped after them, but his sisters had formed a half circle blocking him out. "You're getting so big, all of you," their mother said outside. "I can barely catch enough food to keep up." Yuli's heart started to sink. "So tonight," she said, "you're going to hunt your own insects." The sisters yipped and leaped in excitement, drowning out Yuli's whimpers. He gazed between his sister's ears and up the stone slope. The great boulder shimmered with dawn. It looked so bright and steep that it made his forepaw ached just to look at it. How was he supposed to hunt with only 3 legs? How was he even supposed to climb up there? Their mother cleared her throat, and their sister's yips fell silent. "You are not to venture beyond the crack. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mom," 6 bored voices said at once. Yuli could see it now. The crack, cut high across the great boulder like a crooked grin. Every night the wind blew from the alders to the west and slid along the swell of rock, catching in the crack and howling as if in pain. The crack was just wide enough for a kit to tumble into, and even though he knew it was ridiculous, Yuli had a feeling that this was where Mr. Scratch lived. "Keep within sniffing range," their mother said as Yuli's sisters bounded out of the den. He sat under the arch's window, watching as they geckered across the boulder, ripping at each other's ear and tumbling one another onto the stone. The sight made his whiskers wince. Yuli searched the sky for spiraling shadows. His sisters once told him the story of a mother who walked the boulder fields in the bright of evening, her kits trailing behind her. The mother heard a swoop of wings and turned to find that her one and only son was gone, taken into the skies. The hawk had left nothing behind of the kit save his silhouette, in blood. A muzzle lay between Yuli's ears, making him flinch. "Everything will come twice as hard for you, Yuli, my son," his mother whispered. "But the rewards will be twice as wonderful. Once you've finally managed to nip a strawberry, the juice will taste twice as sweet. The prairie dogs will be twice as succulent when you tear open their bellies. And the vixens," her voice caught, "well, life will have a shine for you that it will not have for any other fox. You'll never take anything for granted." A warmth spread through Yuli's chest, stoked by his mother's words. "Come play with us, Yuli," Agatha called back to the den. "Yeah," Ava cried. "Come play so the hawks eat you instead of us." Yuli flashed a worried look at his mom. She only smiled. "What hawk would want you? You have no meat on your bones." She nuzzled his ear and whispered, "I'd be more worried if I were your sisters." Yuli snorted. He licked her on the snout, took a deep breath, and made a small hop out of the den. Its protective shadow slid back, and the sky opened like a giant's eye above him. He looked back at his mom. "I'm right here," she said. With that, Yuli romped into the evening with a gait just as confident as his sisters, if a little more lopsided. The world outside the den felt violent to Yuli's senses. His nostrils itched with the dust of tumbling rocks. His eyes burned with sunset shining bright behind the alders. The boulder still held the day's heat, sizzling the bottom of his forepaw. He swiveled his ears, searching for insect sounds, but all he heard was his sisters, wrestling, yipping, and playing tug-of-war with sticks. "First kit to catch a dragonfly is Emperor Supreme!" Ava screamed. With that, the sisters bounded into the air, snapping at the swooping blue insects. Clack, 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 clack. Yuli decided to start simple. He fixed his eyes on the first star of the evening, determined to make his first ever jump. He made a mighty push off his forepaw, then leapt with his back two paws, and managed to hop about a whisker off the stone. He cowered, waiting to see which sister would start laughing, but they were too focused on the dragonflies to notice him. Yuli focused on the star and tried again. He pushed up off his forepaw, but this time his hind legs leapt too hard, throwing his top half off balance. He tipped backwards, rotating his body only for his muzzle to crack against the hard stone and chomp his tongue. The laughter came, echoed 6 times. Yuli rolled onto his stomach, jaws trembling, blood dripping from his chin. His mother came to him as she had dozens of times before. She slid her muzzle under his chest, helping him up onto his forepaw. "A fox is clever, Yuli," she said. Above all, your sisters may be able to hunt, but in order to survive in the wild, you'll have to think of something that is truly Yuli." He glanced towards his sisters and whispered, "Can't I just stay with you?" "Oh, honey," his mother gave him a kindly look. "I might not always be here." His ears flattened as he tried and failed to come up with a way only he could survive. His sisters sprinted and swiveled and skidded, making him think of all the things he couldn't do. "Come with me," his mother said. She led him around their den to the low part of the great boulder, which smelled of wet soil and fresh green needles. A few tails away, the boulder ended at a jagged drop-off, announcing the start of the forest. The needles of the fir trees brushed the rock's edges, as if they were slowly eating it. The sisters had told Yuli so many terrifying stories about the forest that he couldn't look into its shadows without seeing faces grinning back at him. "Critters are injured every day," his mother said. "Nestlings fall to the ground, babies are abandoned, innards go uneaten. The forest is a feast, if you know where to look." Yuli sniffed along the boulder's edge, but his nose couldn't seem to catch anything but rock dust. His mother nudged his muzzle toward a light squeaking, which he followed until he caught the warm scent of something tiny and curled. It was a baby squirrel no bigger than an acorn. It had tumbled out of its dray high in the pines. "Congratulations, sweetheart," his mom said. "You're officially a hunter." Yuli opened his mouth to eat the squirrel, but then a breeze made him flinch. He glanced toward his sisters. "We'll tell them you sniffed it out all by yourself," his mother said. "Can you act like a brave hunter?" Yuli puffed out his chest. "Like this?" he said in a scratchy voice. His mother suppressed a giggle. "My little warrior kit." Yuli ate his catch slowly, relishing every bite. "You're right, Mom," he said, licking his lips. "It did taste twice as good." "No fair!" Ava called. "Yuli's cheating!" Yuli's ears folded as 4 of his sisters stepped atop the roof of their stone den and stared down at him. "Mom's hunting for him," Anna said. "Actually," his mom said, "Yuli found that little morsel himself, didn't you, sweetie?" Yuli cowered, forgetting to act brave. "If he can't hunt, he should starve," Ada said. "It's only fair," said Allie. "Hush now," their mother said. "How would any of you feel if your sisters talked about you that way?" 3 of the sisters whimpered with guilt. Only Ava stood strong. "Mr. Scratch wouldn't like what you're doing, Mom." Yuli saw storm clouds pass between his mother's eyes. "Ava," she said, "where on earth did you hear that name?" Ava stared at her mother, defiant. I did it! I did it! Agatha called. The sisters turned to see what had happened. Agatha had snagged a dragonfly out of the air. The insect buzzed and coiled, jabbing at her snout with its juicy abdomen. While their mother and sister licked her with praises, Yuli kept his eyes on Ava. She snuck down the boulder's edge and stuck her muzzle between the needles as if she were looking for someone. Screech! Screech, screech, screech! Yuli dreamed he was being eaten alive. Tiny creatures nibbled every inch of his skin. He tried to scratch them away with his hind paws, but his forepaw kept slipping and the creatures kept leaping back onto him, sinking in their pine needle teeth. Screech, 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 screech. Yuli scratched himself awake. The creatures were gone, but his skin felt like it had been eaten. An itch squirmed to life in his ear, and he dug into it, whimpering. Another bloomed on his neck, and he flopped onto his other hip to reach it. Yuli has mites, Ava whispered. The 6 sisters pressed against the den's far walls, eyes wide. He's being eaten alive, whispered Allie. Yuli wanted to argue, but he couldn't stop scratching. He tried balancing upright so he could switch between his hind legs more easily, but his forepaw kept giving out. He rolled onto his back and writhed, scratching at his sides with both hind paws. You made mites up, he said. Nope, Anna said. They're tiny bugs, Ava said. They live in your hair. Hundreds of them. They just keep having more and more babies, and the babies drink your blood and eat your skin. Soon all your hair falls out and you shrivel up like a rotten peach. And eventually you scratch yourself to pieces and you die. No, Yuli said, scratching, hiccuping, trying to keep upright. I don't have mites. Clearly, Ava said. You do. Scritch, 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 scritch. Now Yuli was trying to scratch away his fear, too. Was this Mr. Scratch? Had he finally come for him? Mom! He howled. Their mother stirred in the back of the den. What is it? Who's crying? Yuli has mites, Ava said. He stinks so bad he drew them all to us, said Ada. All of them, Allie said. We have to abandon den, said Anna. Hush your muzzles, their mother said. She sniffed at Yuli's fur while he continued to scratch. Then she licked the worry from his brow. There, sweetheart. You don't have mites. Your sisters just missed some spots when they cleaned you. Yuli scowled at his sisters, who sniggered, while his mother gave his fur a thorough cleaning. Her tongue reached deep down to his skin, bringing a flutter to his eyelids. But when she finished, he still felt itchy. He nibbled at his hind legs, convinced he wouldn't feel better until he chewed every inch of his fur off. His mom sighed and trotted to the mouth of their stone den. Yuli followed her gaze up the great boulder into the night. His jaw began to tremble. He knew what his mom was going to say, and he wanted to bite her whiskers to keep her from saying it. We'll have to take you to the rain pool, his mom said. A quick dip should do the trick. Yuli went so numb he hardly felt the itching anymore. The rain pool was beyond the crack. Ava scoffed. How is he supposed to swim with only 3? Ava, her mother said. Bite your tongue this instant. Ava grudgingly shut her muzzle. The rest of you are coming with us, their mother said, and you're going to keep Yuli safe because you didn't do your job as sisters. No fox can clean all the hard-to-reach places by themselves. I'm very disappointed in you. The sisters hung their heads, some because they were ashamed, others to hide their smiles. Their mother sniffed outside. It's a good night for a journey. The wind will obscure our scent, and any hawks will be swept off their strike. She usually avoided taking them out late when the hawks could spot them under the bright of the moon. Yuli was about to tell her he didn't need to go, that he'd learned to live with the scratching. But then a new itch burned to life on his eyelid, and he knew it would drive him to madness. if he didn't scratch himself to pieces first. "Keep close to my tail now," his mom said. As Yuli pushed up on his paws, Ava pressed her cold snout into his ear. "Watch out for the crack, Yuli." He snapped at her, but she leapt away and he barely caught his balance. "What are you going to do?" he asked her. Ava only smiled and joined their sisters at the mouth of the cave, and Yuli found himself wishing he could scratch her away like he would an itch. The stars pierced bright and sharp that night. The air was alive with wind. The kit's mother moved swiftly up the curve of the boulder, and the 6 sisters followed close. Only Yuli trailed behind, stopping every few tails to scratch an itch and search the night sky for winged silhouettes. They arrived at the crack. The boulder glowed bone white on either side, falling into a darkness that whistled eerie notes into Yuli's heart. Their mother lifted a forepaw and took roll. "Here, here, 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 here." "Yuli?" "Here," he whispered. If Mr. Scratch did live in the darkness, Yuli didn't want him to know he was there. Their mother hopped over the crack like it was nothing more than a trickle of water. "Ava, you're Alpha. Show your siblings how it's done." Ava sat down. "I want to make sure Yuli gets across safely first, Mom." Yuli's ears folded. "That's very considerate of you," their mother said. "Allie?" Allie gave a little scoot backwards and then bounded easily, clearing the crack. Yuli glanced at Ava. She smiled. "Anna?" their mother said. With a skittering start, Anna made a mighty leap and landed safely on the other side. Yuli was more afraid of Ava than he was of any hawk. The hawks never came into his den and teased him about his sickly paw. They never stole food out of his muzzle. "Aya?" Aya held her breath, ran, and leapt. Safe. What was Ava going to do? Wait until Yuli tried to jump and then clamp onto his tail so he went tumbling into the crack and she never had to clean him again? "Ada and Agatha." The 2 kits wiggled their hips and then bounded across. Or did Ava know Mr. Scratch was going to lunge out of the darkness and seize his throat with ashen teeth? "Okay, Yuli," Mom said. "Your turn." All of the siblings were across the crack except him and Ava, the runt and the Alpha. He stared into the darkness that fell away between him and his mother. His foreleg collapsed and he fell to his belly. "Yuli," his mother said with a touch of scorn. "You're much too big for me to come and carry you. Come along now." "Come on, Yuli," Agatha cried. "You can do it." "Yeah, jump, jump." "Do it before the hawk swoops down and rips out our innards." "Stop being such a muler." Yuli gave Ava a wary look. She smirked and took a step back. She didn't need to grab his tail for him to slip and fall into the crack. Yuli could accomplish that all by himself. "Eyes on me, Yuli," his mom said. Yuli pushed up onto his 3 paws and scratched at his chest. He gave his mom a determined look, then, before he could second-guess himself, bounded 3 times. A whisker before the crack, he closed his eyes, pushed off his forepaw, and leapt with his 2 hind legs. His heart lifted as the darkness passed beneath him. There was a breathless moment of wind. Yuli's forepaw touched down on the other side. But his hind paws fell away into nothing. The edge of the boulder struck his stomach, forcing an oof from his muzzle. His forepaw started to slip as the weight of his hind legs dragged him backward. Yuli whimpered and clawed as he went slipping into the crack, where he plopped into a vein of mud. He was in a stone tunnel. Darkness howled around him, broken only by a vein of stars. At the far end of the tunnel was a hole that looked onto a lashing fir trees. Yuli heard a faint trickle of water and a low wind that sounded just like breathing. Teeth clamped onto his scruff and hauled him upward. His mom plopped him, breathless, beside his sisters. "You did it, Yuli!" Agatha called. "Kind of," Allie said. The 5 sisters licked his fur, snickering, but happy to see him safe and sound. Trembling, Yuli peered back into the crack. From this side, he could see that it was no more than a tail deep. He never had anything to be afraid of. On the other side of the crack, Ava laughed so hard she could barely breathe. Yuli, you should have seen yourself. Her laughter rippled to the other sisters. Hey, guys, Ava called to them. Watch this. Who am I? Ava, their mother said, snarling with warning. Ava curled her left forepaw to her chest. Her right forepaw trembled as she put on a scared face and made a pathetic hop over the crack. Even though she landed safely on the other side, she fell to her belly and pushed herself backwards until her hind legs dangled over the ledge, desperately clawing with her right forepaw. Ha ha! Laughed Ada. Said Allie. That's exactly what he looked like, said Aya. Come on, Yuli, Anna said, nipping his throat. You can laugh, it's funny. Ava, watch out! Their mother screamed. A red and yellow king snake struck from the crack, sinking its fangs into Ava's leg. Her yelp echoed across the boulder. Her mother seized her by the scruff and shook until the snake's coiling body came loose. It slithered back into the crack, right where Yuli would have stepped if he'd had an extra paw to step with. Ava's body slumped onto the rock, paws twitching, while their mother whimpered and licked her face. Yuli could only watch in shock as the venom spread in veins through Ava's eyes, as her breath grew faster, 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 and then slowed and was gone. The days passed in pinks and golds outside the den. Now that the sisters were only 5, their spell over Yuli seemed to have broken. They didn't have Ava's sharp tongue or dark ideas to torment him anymore. Still, life didn't grow easier for Yuli. His skin still itched, his tummy still ached. Ever since Ava had died, the kit's mother had been too grief-stricken to hunt. She spent the days and nights lying with her face toward the stone while Yuli's sisters scavenged for themselves. But they managed to catch only beetles and grasshoppers, leaving him nothing but barbed legs and antennae. Yuli wondered if Ava had survived, would things have been better for him, or worse? One night, after his sisters were asleep, Yuli crept to the back of the den and curled up beside his mom. He cleaned the tears from her eyes, only stopping to scratch an itch. He needed to cheer her up. He couldn't hunt by himself. The world felt as big and impossible as it had the day of the dragonfly hunt. His forelegs still trembled when he thought about climbing the boulder or jumping over anything wider than a whisker. Mom? She didn't stir. Mom, I'm hungry. He listened to her breath, soft and ragged from sobbing. Would she have grieved like this if the snake had bitten him instead of Ava? He scratched another itch. The light outside was growing hazy. A couple months from now, after the leaves had fallen, his sisters would be celebrating their golden-eyed day. They would become vixens and leave the den to sniff out a suitable mate. Shortly before that, boy foxes were meant to have their own golden-eyed days, setting out to mark their own territories. With only 3 paws, Yuli knew that would never happen for him, but he didn't mind. Once his sisters were gone, he planned to remain in the den with his mom forever. He cleaned his mom's face, hoping to wake her. He licked her muzzle, her tear-streaked whiskers, her ears, and he noticed one was missing a tip. Mom, how'd you hurt your ear? Your father did that, she whispered without opening her eyes. It was an accident. Yuli wondered what life would have been like if his dad was still alive. Would they have enough food? Would Yuli's left foreleg have grown like the others? Would Ava have been nicer to him? Would she still be alive? Mom, how did Dad die? His mom finally opened her eyes. Something passed behind them like storm clouds. For the first time since Ava died, his mom gave a small smile, but it faded just as quickly when she saw Yuli's ribs poking through his fur. You've grown so thin, she said. I'm sorry. Yuli stared at the ground. Yeah. I'll catch us some food in the morning, she said, laying her head back down. Yuli's stomach gurgled happily. And can I stay here with you? Forever? Yes, darling, she said. Forever. He lay between her paws and she curled around him, her tail protecting his tail, her muzzle his muzzle, and they fell asleep. Yuli! Yuli woke to the sound of his mom's panicked voice. Yuli, wake up, she whispered. We have to hide you. He opened his eyes and found her dragging leaves over his body. What? Why? Because we're playing a game, my darling, she said, trying to keep her voice calm. You're going to play dead, and your sisters are going to try and find you. She pawed leaves over his tail. Don't move a muscle until I tell you it's safe. Now hush, the game is starting. Yuli didn't like the sound of his mom's voice or the look on her face. Mom, I don't want to play a game. I want food. Hush now. Do as I say. Yuli whimpered as she pawed leaves over his head. He tried to lie quietly, but his heart wouldn't stop pounding. He watched, wide-eyed, through the cracks in the leaves. Outside, dawn bloomed rosy and strange. A western wind blew along the boulder, and it carried a new scent. Beneath the pine was something like lilac. Yuli's sisters lined up near the den's entrance. He'd never seen them sit so still. Keep quiet about your brother now, his mom whispered to the sisters. Why? Asked Aya. Yeah, said Ellie. Who cares about Yuli? Not me, said Ada. Not any... A shadow darkened the entrance, and the sisters fell silent. Yuli blinked. It was a fox. At first, all he could make out was a silhouette, two sharp shoulder blades angling towards sharp ears. But then he squinted through the leaves and saw bright amber eyes, a muzzle streaked black, and two white fangs like moons in their waning. His mother bowed. I thought you were dead. And Yuli knew that this fox was his father. The fox tilted up his nose. How pleasantly surprised you must be. Yes, his mother said, her jaws trembling. I am. The fox examined the den with the light of his eyes. Are you going to invite me in? Yes, she said, glancing toward Yuli beneath the leaves. Please, come in. The fox padded inside, wafting his lilac scent. Yuli thought he'd be excited to see his father alive and in their den, but instead he was conscious of every bit of his own fur that might be showing through the leaves. He wasn't quite sure why. The fox walked up and down the line of sisters, sniffing. This is your litter? Yes, this is all of them, their mother said breathlessly. 5. Where's the clever one? Ava, was it? Killed, his mother said. She swallowed deeply. Bitten by a king snake. How did you... The fox huffed, interrupting her. He sniffed toward the pile of leaves where Yuli was hidden. Where's the cripple? Yuli's mom was shocked into silence a moment. He's also dead, she said, her breath shallow. Starved in the night. Ah. The fox's whiskers curled into a smile. Good. He patted the den's perimeters. Shame about Ava. She was an obedient kit. She followed my instructions for what to do with a crippled runt. You steal its food until it starves. Yuli remembered the song his sisters had sung. Mr. Scratch is made of ash. Mr. Scratch has teeth that gnash. Gobbles all the litter's runts. Tiny kits are what he hunts. Dear mother won't make any fuss when there's more food for the rest of us. And Yuli realized that his father was Mr. Scratch. You spoke to Ava? His mother asked. Mr. Scratch smiled. When you left me to die beneath these rocks, my anger kept me alive. Over time, I managed to dig myself out and track your scent across the long miles. His ember eyes fixed Yuli's mom to the spot. And I finally found you. Yuli's mom tried to smile, but her lips were shaking. Mr. Scratch marched up and down the line of sisters, sniffing at their fur, their ears. I have been visiting the base of this boulder at night, watching, checking to ensure that you have remained loyal to me. He found a bit of mud on Agatha's paw and sneered until she licked it away. He continued to the entrance and looked out across the rock. Ava saw me in the alders one night, and I have been whispering life's secrets to her ever since. She was to inform me when she and her siblings could celebrate their golden-eyed day so I could collect what was rightfully mine. His eyes flashed at Yuli's mom. And bring you home with me. Yuli bit his tongue to keep from whimpering. His mom couldn't leave. She was supposed to stay there with him forever. She promised. Mr. Scratch smiled at the sisters. He turned to exit the den, but then peered back over his shoulder. Once these kits have grown, you will return to the Lilac Kingdom. Yuli's mom hung her head. I'll return. Yuli started to tremble, rattling the leaves. When his sisters left the den in autumn, would his mom really leave him to fend for himself? She'd promised he would stay with her forever. A silence cut through the den. Yuli folded his forepaw under his muzzle to stop his hiccups, but it only made them worse. Mr. Scratch sniffed. Does it live? He asked, slow and dangerous. No, that was me, Yuli's mom said. Mr. Scratch padded to the back of the den and pawed the leaves from Yuli. He scowled at Yuli's wilted foreleg. Yuli couldn't stop hiccuping. This, Mr. Scratch said to Yuli's mom, cannot be here. She started to shake. When? He's only 2 moons old. One of his legs didn't grow right. He can't leave. He won't survive. Who said anything about leaving? Mr. Scratch said. I want you to break its neck. Yuli's mom looked horror-struck. Win, please. Yuli couldn't do anything but tremble and hiccup. Mr. Scratch sighed. A vixen who births something this pathetic must be the one to take care of it. He nodded towards Yuli. Do it now. Yuli's sisters started to whimper. Yuli cowered in the leaves. His mom didn't move. Very well, Mr. Scratch said. He lunged across the den. There was a flash of white, a sharp snap, and then the tip of Agatha's ear was dangling. Blood trickled down her cheek. Mr. Scratch cast a shadow over the 5 sisters. I will give you a choice, he said to their mother. You can keep the 5 girls or the crippled boy. Choose quickly, or I'll kill them all. Yuli's mom looked from Yuli to his sisters. No, you can't make me. Mr. Scratch took Agatha's throat in his mouth and twisted. She whimpered and trembled, blood dripping from her ear. Yuli met his mom's eyes. Tears streamed down her cheek. Mom, he said. She said. I choose. Before she could say it, Yuli ran from the den. He hopped up the slick of the great boulder, claws skidding, whimpering every time his forepaw struck the hard stone. Every few steps he stumbled, bruising his muzzle, but he sensed an ashen shadow behind him, and his fear would pick him up again. Yuli reached the crack and hesitated, but then he heard the ragged breath of the wind. He leapt again. His stomach struck the far edge. Again, his forepaw clawed desperately, his hind leg dragging him down. He struck the mud and found himself back in the howling tunnel. Red and yellow scales coiled wetly through the rock. Without his mother there to drag him out, Yuli couldn't reach the crack of sky above. At the end of the tunnel, he saw the opening onto the fir trees. He heard the rush of water, the swish of needles. He ran until the rock came to an abrupt end. Muddy water spilled around his forepaw and over an edge, trickling down 100 tails into a shallow pool below. He stared at the drop as the darkness howled behind him. He could sense Mr. Scratch's muzzle snarling through the crack, snipping towards his ears. Yuli didn't so much jump as slip off the ledge. He fell and fell and fell until his body smacked the water and everything went dark. He flipped and rolled and spun in circles as he scrabbled for the surface. His forepaw caught onto something solid and he dragged himself dripping onto the shore, where he flopped, gasping, onto his side. Once his breath came easy again, he pushed himself upright. His eyes climbed to the cliff. He expected to find Mr. Scratch perched atop the great boulder, but there was no one there. Yuli blinked the mud from his eyelashes. The ragged breath, the ashen shadow, it had all been his imagination. His own fear had chased him into the crack and off the cliff, and now he'd never get back to his den again. He was about to howl for his mother, but his throat tightened. If Mr. Scratch heard him, he might leap down and end Yuli's life. Yuli gazed into the alders, the face in the shadows, and decided the trees were less terrifying than his father. He hopped into the forest. He would wait until the wind cleaned the lilac scent from the boulder, and his mother called down that it was safe to come out again. She'd find a way to guide him back up the cliff, even if she had to leap down and carry him by the scruff. Yuli didn't go far into the forest, only a few foxtails where his mom could still catch his scent. He found a mossy spot and plopped, wet and exhausted, onto his stomach. No one was there to nuzzle him upright again. "This story is dumb," the fourth kid said, pushing up on his trembling paws. "No dad would ever try and kill his son. And even if he tried, the mom would stop him." His voice was shaking. "This story is unrealistic and dumb and dumb." With that, he padded back toward the den to snuggle his mother, just to make sure. 5 little foxes. The sky above the antler wood was the color of rotting pumpkins now. A chill crept into the little one's paws. "Wait," the 5th kid said. "What happened to Yuli?" "Patience," the storyteller told him, eyes flashing in the shadow of the caverns. "Why were his sisters so mean to him?" the beta asked. "They lived in a land where food was scarce," the storyteller said. "Who knows? If the antler wood ran dry and the berries vanished and even the measliest of morsels was swept up by the owls, you might try and starve your siblings too." The 5 kids gave one another doubtful looks. Their bellies were full with muskrats and earthworms. "You promised the story would be scary," the 3rd kid said. "Shh," said the beta. "You're going to make it worse." "I cannot make it better or worse," the storyteller said. "Only tell you what happened." The 3rd kid wrinkled her muzzle. "Fine." The storyteller sighed, and the breeze blew cold. "There are creatures who live in the wood, but do not belong there. They are as tall as trees, but skinny as sticks, and their hairless skin is as pale as bone." A figure loomed in the little one's mind. "They're cold and lonely, these creatures," the storyteller said. "Some might steal a fox's skin for warmth. Others might do something much, much worse." A branch snapped in the wood. The little one tried not to look.